Okay. Myself, Janardhan, for the people who joined from other places. Today I'm here to talk about Angular. Recent days we have been hearing a lot about Angular. I just wanted to give some introduction or big fundamentals about the Angular. And the current version till today is 4.3.2. Okay. How many of you know Angular? So then I am safe. Maybe I can say whatever I want to. But I believe that from Chennai team, definitely most people have known about it. Let's get started. Okay. The agenda is what are we gonna cover in this session is I just want to touch all the fundamentals of the Angular so that we'll get an idea of what Angular is and what it can do and how we can use it better. So I'll cover the introduction and the basics of typescripting. We need TypeScript knowledge for Angular. We can also check how we can set up the development environment and then we go into the Angular bits and pieces, the basic ones like components and decorators, and the concept of data binding, directives, services, and dependency injection. These are all the different concepts in Angular, routing, forms, and pipes. But covering all of these topics in 1 hour is almost impossible. So at least let us try covering at least the first 5 topics. Okay. Now, what is Angular? Before knowing Angular, we should know about a abbreviation called SPA. SPA stands for Single Page Application, and single page we have been implementing many web applications in this architecture recently. The advantage of single page application. Anybody can say what is the advantage of single page application over the traditional web application? Okay. It's okay. Let me tell you, the single page application is a web application or a website that can fit on a single web page. So the goal of why do we need a single page application? For that answer, we have been working in a lot of traditional web applications. The disadvantage with the traditional web application is that the high response times. Whenever we click on a link or any tab, we have to wait until the next page gets downloaded onto the browser and it renders up. We have to wait. That is the experience when we work with a web application. But when you use a desktop application or a mobile application, we don't see that. We don't actually know there is a lot of response time. We feel that everything is seamless. So that kind of the single page application architecture came in place to provide the user that kind of user experience. So the aim is to reduce the response times in even web applications. So now let's come back to Angular. So Angular is a framework using which we can develop client web applications or single page applications using HTML and JavaScript. Those two are enough, but we can also use languages like TypeScript, which compiles back into the JavaScript. But why the need of TypeScript is it is providing few more advantages over the JavaScript. We can cover them. Okay. So the Angular is a framework for building the client-side applications using HTML and JavaScript or TypeScript. Let us see the history in brief. In 2009, a guy called Misko Haveri, he created this framework called AngularJS. Sorry, it's AngularJS. So he created that. He worked on a software. He wanted to maintain some online JSON storage service. So for that, he has created this AngularJS. And then it was happened in 2009. And 2010, Google owned that product and they released it as AngularJS 1.x. It has been there, even they are upgrading it now. We can get it as AngularJS. I think 1.6 is the latest one. But once Google launched this, people are very much attracted to this and they started using it very high level. But the Google team is not happy with the performance of that AngularJS framework. That's why in 2016, they have rebuilt a new framework right from the scratch and they call it as Angular 2. It is completely different than the AngularJS. So they call it as Angular 2. So AngularJS is different from Angular 2. And they're also recommending us, if you new to the Angular and you want to get started with the Angular, they are recommending us to learn Angular 2 rather than using the AngularJS, because they wanted to just abandon it. But by this time when they launched the Angular 2, it's very latest 2016, a lot of applications started running on the AngularJS. So they can't skip it, they're still releasing the updates, but they're recommending us not to use it. But in 2017, they released a framework called Angular 4. It is even more advanced than Angular 2, but still it is compatible to Angular 2. So other than AngularJS, any Angular with number Angular 2, 4, all these things are of the same framework, but these are the technical upgrades. And they skipped the version Angular 3. There is no Angular 3 because in the Angular 2, they have we have a module called routers. The version of the router in Angular 2 is 3.3. So if they again release Angular 3, there will be some confusion. In order to avoid those confusions, they just skip the Angular 3 version. So now we have Angular 4 is the latest one. Angular 4.3.2 is the very latest version that we currently get. So now there are two. That is the major difference between the AngularJS and Angular. And why Angular is so popular? So let us see some of the reasons for that. The first one is free. We need not buy it. People are really interested on the free things like GeoRide. So it's an open source library. It's released under the Apache open source license. So we need not buy it. It's free. And then second one is, this is most interesting thing in Angular. So we have been working on web applications since long time, and we can say that we are experts in web application development. But if you think of developing a mobile application or a desktop application, the development approach or the strategies that we follow for developing those things is completely different than the web application. So now Angular is unifying all of these into a single. If you know Angular, you can develop a web application, mobile application, or even a desktop application. So only Angular is enough to develop an application for any device, any operating system, or for any kind of platform. So web application, we are going to see how to build a single web application using Angular, that we are going to cover. And Apache Cordova is an open source library or framework. We can use this for building a mobile application using Angular. Similarly, there is Electron, that's another framework for building the desktop application using Angular. I think this is the most important reason for the Angular popularity. And then other one is, of course, it's released and maintained by Google. That's the most trusted brand ever by the developers or many people. So that is one of the other reason, and easy to learn because all the application development is taking place on HTML and JavaScript, which is easier. It supports full MVC architecture and dependency injection, modularity and scalability. And there is a inbuilt testing framework comes up with the Angular. They are using Jasmine testing framework, and Karma is a test runner. So I think these are some of the reasons for Angular popularity. There are a few more reasons, and while going into the Angular development, we'll get to understand all those things. And then let's come to TypeScript. Just few minutes ago I told that Angular 2 is recommending us to use the TypeScript for Angular development. So TypeScript is a programming language developed and maintained by Microsoft. So why does Angular is recommending us to use TypeScript? There is a reason for that. TypeScript is a ES6 standard programming language. It supports ES6 standard. So it's a superset of JavaScript. While the disadvantage with the JavaScript is that when we are writing complex logic, we don't have a compile time checking in JavaScript. So that is one of the major drawbacks for the developers. So in order to overcome that, TypeScript provides a compile time checking. Apart from that, there are a lot of other features that we can make use of while using the TypeScript. So as I said, ES6 standard offers those lambdas, iterators, loops, Python style generators, reflection. All these concepts are there should a language which obeys the ES6 specification should obey all these things. They should provide these kind of features. So if we can type our Angular in TypeScript, we can make use of these kind of features. That is the reason behind the TypeScript uses in Angular. So class-based programming we can do, and static typing is there. Generics we can use. And one more thing is TypeScript can't run in a browser. So, but we have a TypeScript compiler within the Angular. It compiles into the JavaScript, which executes on a browser. And then if we see a TypeScript class, if you know any one of the object-oriented programming, it's almost same. There is nothing new in TypeScript. If you can see my screen, I just added a sample class in a TypeScript code. If you see that there is a class employee, I have written a small class there, class employee. The export keyword is there. That export keyword indicates that we can reuse this class. If we export it in another class, we can import and reuse that particular class. And if you see that there are two properties, employee number and employee name, this is how we declare employee number colon the type is the number. Even though we don't specify any type, by default is any, the kind of any. So in like JavaScript, whatever value you assign, it accepts.
You want to log into the software and just show a video of that?
Yeah. In the next steps, I'm going to show that. It's very hard to see you. Can you guys understand that? Is it visible properly? Okay. And there is a constructor. Constructor is, we know the constructor, that is the method that gets executed as soon as the object creation is done. And we can write, there is a default constructor I have written, and we can also write parameterized constructors. And this is the way that we write methods. I just written a method called print employee details. I'm just printing those employee name and employee number in the console. But if you see on the top, we have the import statement. Like Java, we import all the classes and interfaces from different packages, right? Similarly, Angular core is a library from Angular. Component is a class from Angular. We are importing it because we are using that. This is called the method that starts with @ we call it as decorator in Angular. It works similar to Java annotation, but we can check it later. Just skip it for now. This is the typical TypeScript class. And dev environment. What are the things that we need to set up in order to start working with Angular? So Node.js is the platform for Angular. We need to install the Node.js, upon which we need to install the Angular CLI. So the first thing we need to install Node.js and Node Package Manager NPM module. Those two things are mandatory. And Node.js version should be 6.9 and above for supporting the Angular 4. And the NPM module version should be greater than 3. NPM is Node Package Manager. It works similar to Maven in Java. We use in Maven, we will have a form.xml. It's the configuration file where we set up all our dependencies for the project. it automatically downloads from the internet and configure within our project build. Similarly, Node Package Manager do that. In project, we'll have a package.json, that's the property file. We can mention all the JavaScript libraries, dependent libraries into it. It automatically, when we build the project, it automatically adds all of them to the project. Then we are ready to develop the Angular. If you want to create a new project, this is the command that ng is the command for Angular CLI, interacting with the Angular CLI. Ng new is the keyword and the application name, whatever we want to give. It creates the entire project structure. And after creating, if you want to build the application, npm install is the command. That's for downloading and setting up all the libraries, dependent libraries into project. And once it is done, we are ready to run the application. ngserve is the command for running the starting the server. Angular comes up with a default server within it. The web application automatically gets deployed into that, and we should be able to access the URL. The open or wo is an argument. That is an optional. If you provide that, it automatically opens the browser and opens the URL in the browser.
So the installation is pretty much straightforward.
Yeah, it's as simple as double clicking some downloaded file. That's all. So IDEs, integrated development environments for the Angular, is the first and the best one is, this is the open source Visual Studio Code from Microsoft, and I'm using it. It's a pretty good development tool. And there are few more, IntelliJ IDEA and WebStorm. WebStorm is also a good one from JetBrains, Atom and ALM, Angular IDE from WebClips, and any other IDE that we can use for Angular development, but it should support the TypeScripting. Angular project structure. If we create a project using the Angular CLI, this is the typical project structure. The files and folders gets created into the project folder. I think you can barely see that, but I don't want to explain all of those to avoid confusion, but at least few things. There is a node module folder. If you see the second one from the top, this is the folder where all the dependent libraries gets added into the folder, to the project. And there is a source folder. This is where all our source files gets created initially, and our custom code also will write into this source folder. And there is a, you can see in the second image and on the right side, no sorry, on the first side only, there is a package.json is on the second one. You can see my mouse on that, cursor on that. This is where we configure all the libraries if you want to add additional libraries to the project. I can show some of the files and how we can use them when we start coding it. I think it's the time. Let's see the basics of creating project and the environment. I'm opening my terminal. So the first, I want to check the node on which I'm running. Node -v is a command. That is 7.7.3. I want to check the npm. Npm is 4.1.2. So I'm ready to run Angular 4 without any problems on my machine. If I check the Angular CLI version that I'm using, I use ng-v to check it takes a bit of time. See, that is the Angular CLI version 1.2.1, and the Angular is running on the node 7.7.3. That's the information we get. If we want to create a new project, I'm going to documents. I'll create a folder called since it's already there, it creates a folder with my name Jana, and I'm moving to that folder. This is where I want to create my Angular project. So we just see the command ng new. The project name I want to create is demo. So if I click on enter, it automatically creates all this structure for me. So now the project is ready. Within I'm currently in Jana folder, and within that the demo. If you see, there is a demo folder got created with all the project files. I'll open that folder from my IDE. So Visual Studio Code. This is the IDE I'll use. Open. Then documents, Jana, and this is the demo folder. Is the project that we just created. So this is the project structure we would get. So if you see, there is no node modules folder added to the project. It gets added once we build the project. So initially we got the source folder. Within source, it's created one app folder, and there are environments and all the other folders. App folder consists of one app modules.ts. The files with .ts extension are the TypeScript files. So the .ts file, this is the app modules, this is the root module of the application. So enter, as we discussed, Angular supporting modularity, the entire application got created as a single module. That is the app module.ts. So we can create multiple modules, but in general, it creates one module, that is the app module. So this is the most important file for the project. Apart from the app modules, it creates a app component. Components we can check later, but it creates one component that is called root component or app component. And if you see, there is an environments folder. There are two environments files, and this is for, in general, when we are developing an application, we'll use some property files for configuration. So we will maintain different property files for different environments, for dev, QA, and prod. In such cases, if we maintain all the properties in one environment. At the time of building the application, we can pass an argument saying that for which environment we are going to build the application. So it automatically takes the right property files for the build. That is the advantage with the environments. And the best thing, the file that you see, readme.md, is the file that got created, and you would get the basic information of how we can how we can start the server, how we can build, how we can run the unit test cases, how we can run the end-to-end test. All these help they are provided in one file with the readme.md. That's very informative file. We can just take a look at it. Let us, we just created this folder. Let us try running it. We also know the commands for building and running the project, right? I'm trying to build the project. I need to move to the project folder first. I'm going to demo folder. Now I'm going to build the project by giving this command npm install. That's all. It downloads all the, let me show you in the package.json file. If you see that, these are all the dependencies that we have added to the project. This is the dependent library and the version that we want to configure within the project. So all these files gets downloaded, and if you see, node modules project got added to the folder to our project, and these are all the dependent libraries that are added within the project. So npm install is done. Now I'm ready to run the project. Anybody remember what's the command for? Okay, good, thanks. ng-serve is the command for deploying or running the application. I also give the command line argument -o so that it automatically opens the application for me. There is URL, the default port is 4200, and it's showing the IP address on which the project is built. And you can also see this. Once we run the ng server, until we forcefully quit it, it will be in continuous listening mode. Any change do in the application for any file, it automatically compiles and rebuilds and redeploys the application. So this is the file URL that opens on the computer, and that's it. We created the Angular project. As simple as this. Let us go back to our slide deck and see from there. So we have covered all the dev environment till now. Anybody got any questions? Next, components are the basic building blocks of Angular, or if you can say that the fundamental unit of an Angular MVC framework. We have been working on multiple MVC frameworks like Struts, JS, or Spring Web. So anywhere, if we want to write one page in the application, this is the typical architecture that we follow. We'll create a controller class and we'll create a template which is assigned to the controller class, and the controller will have all the logic for presentation that is going to be showed on the template. Similarly, components are the units where components are the TypeScript classes where we write all the logic, presentation logic into it. This TypeScript class will have an association with a template, UI template. So this TypeScript class is responsible for what to show up, what is the data that is to be presented on that particular component, and when user interact with the component, it is the responsible class for taking the changes from the component. Or we can simply say that component is a TypeScript class with the component decorator. Decorator, I just said that decorator works similar to annotation in Java. That is for providing the metadata about that particular class or any property. If you see this in this picture, component, the bottom one is a component TypeScript class. We have a template on the top. So this component is associated to this template, and we use component decorator for providing metadata about this component. And if we want to have a business logic separately in an MVC architecture, we can use services. They work on injector architecture. We can cover that in later part, but this is the component. We can create the components using Angular CLI, but we can check it later once we create a component manually. So this is the basic component class that looks like this. So if you see, there is a class component, welcome component I just created. Let's forget about this implements. We can check it later. And it has a constructor, and there is an import on the top. We need a component class, and on it interface from the Angular core. I just implemented those, imported those two into this class. So if you see, there is a component decorator at the red component, and it is taking a JSON object as a parameter. We simply use components as similar to calling a method with parentheses. If that component doesn't need any argument, we'll simply call it as component with parentheses. If that needs any arguments, then we'll pass on as a parameter. Here, if you see, it's taking a JSON object with some properties. Selector is one property, template URL is one property, and styles URL. These are the properties as a JSON object I'm passing to the component class. Yeah, I'll tell you. So this is the just basic. I think this is a time for us to create a component manually in the code. So still our server is running because I did not stop it. If I do any modification to these files, it gets deployed and it can be seen in this URL. What I do is I'll create a new component within the source folder. We have an app. Within the app folder, I create a new folder. So this is the convention that we follow. I want to create a home component. So each component has a component class. It will associate with a template, and we can also use external CSS file, and we can also use some unit test cases file. So all of them together makes a component. So in order to organize them properly, we'll create all the files related to a component into one folder. That's why I just created home folder within the app, and now I create a new file. I'll first create the component class, TypeScript class. For that, this is the convention, naming convention that we follow. Because this is home dot component dot ts. Because it's a TypeScript file, we need to. So we have multiple files for one component. We want to distinguish properly which is class, which is template HTML, which is CS. For that, we call this kind of naming convention. So I just created a template component class for home. So I'll write the component class, export class. I'm exporting this because this is a reusable class. If I want to use the same component in any other module, I can do that by doing so. Home component. This is also best practice to keep the component class name as component so that it's easy to maintain. So I created the class, but still it is a TypeScript class, but it's not a component because Angular doesn't know that it's a component. We should tell the Angular that the class that I'm writing is a component. So for that, we should decorate this class with component decorator. So I just wrote it, but it is showing an error. Why? Because it doesn't know what is component. This particular TypeScript class doesn't know what is component. So I need to import that. For that, I'm importing import from Angular core. Angular core is the default library. We get a lot of things from Angular core. So I want to import component class. So component. So this is what I do. First, I'll write the library and then come back and type the classes or interfaces that I want to implement. That is how, by doing so, I'll get the intelligence properly. If I type the class name first, it doesn't know which class we want to import from which package. So if we give the first, if we give the library first, it gets to know. It lists out all the classes or interfaces starting with that particular letter within the library. So I have imported the component class, but still it is showing error because the component is a parameterized decorator. It takes a parameter. See, if I give a JSON object, empty JSON object, it's not showing error. Now, so the component, as I said, there are two major things. I mean, two mandatory items that we need to pass on to the component. That is selector. Selector is the key. As I said, component is a reusable class. If we want to access this class from anywhere, we need a key. For example, I have a component and I have a HTML page associated to it. I want to use that HTML page somewhere. So this is the key that we need to use. I call this as a home. I'll use it as app home. App home is my selector. So in order to access this page, I'll use app home tag in my HTML. So this is how it works. Apart from the selector, we need a template, right? So each component is a combination of TypeScript class plus template. If it is a simple HTML that we want to show in the template, we can simply write it as a single line here. I'm saying that in a h1 tag, I'll just write it as home component. So now my component is ready because it has selector and it has template. And now I need to integrate this to the existing application. If you see the index.html in the project, this is the one and only file that gets served. Because it's a single page application, we'll get only one file served onto the browser. If you see open source, view page source, you see only the code which is there in the index.html. We have only these lines, and we have a app root tag here. So here also in the view source we have only app root tag, but what all the code that we have written in the components and components templates, that won't get added to the page that is stored on the browser. That's why it's faster. And if you see this, app root is a tag that they are using. If you go to the app component.html, this is where we have all the code. I just get rid of all these things. Where? Maybe, just give me a second. References. It would be there, but I never tried. Okay, I just removed the additional code from the component template and I saved it. If you see the page, it's showing only the welcome to app component. All the links and the additional logo, all these were gone. So what I'm trying to do is, within this app component.html, I want to invoke our component that we just created. But before doing that, as I said, the selector that we used within the app component, home component, is app-home. So in order to access this in the app component, this is the file that got executed initially, and this is the app component is the one that got created by the Angular CLI. So now I am integrating the component that created into this app component HTML. Now this should show up the message that what we have written within the app component template. Home component is the message that we written, but it failed. To see the errors, just inspect, and in the console you can see what's the problem with this. What it's saying is app home is not a known element. That means we created a component, but Angular doesn't know. We just decorated with the component, but still when the application boots up, it did not find any app component there for booting up. So for that, we need to register every component in the app module.ts. So if you see in the declarations part, our app component is already there, because the app component is the root component that got created by the Angular. Now I'll import the component that we created. Here, import home component. For importing, we should use all the relative paths. If you see, app module is under the app folder. If you see, it's under the app folder, but we want to import the file from the home folder, right? So first I need to, from the current folder, I should go to home, and within that home.component, we should not write the .ts extension there. So I have imported the file, and I need to mention that within the declarations. So that's it. I just saved it. H1 tag was wrong here. I just saved it, and yes, this is the template that we have mentioned within the home component. The welcome to app is coming from the app component, because we have added the home component within the app component template file here. So that's why it is coming as home component. And there are a few more within the component. We use this selector. We call this as element selector because we use it as a HTML tag. We can also use this. There is a different types of selectors. We can just, I commented it out, and if I add this within a square brackets, we'll call this as an attribute selector. So if we mention our selector like this, the way of accessing this would be different. If we use a direct element selector, we use that as a HTML uh, tag there within the HTML template. But if we use it as an attribute selector, we should use it as a HTML attribute. I'll just creating a div. Within div, I give it as a app home. This is a attribute for the div. See, now it came as is. Using the element selector is like using the HTML tag with the selector name, but using it as a attribute selector, we just need to use these square brackets with the selector name. And there is another way that we can use, that is called CSS selector. In that, we use a dot and the name. This is the customer, whatever we want to give, we can give. But the thing is, it should be across, it should be unique across all the application, because there should not be any problem of having the same name for multiple components. So I just change it as dot app home. So this is how I can access. For a div, I'll use class. This is the way how we use for CSS classes. Class is equal to app home. Even then it gives the same result. Depending on the requirement, in some cases we may not be able to use the selector as a element tag, HTML tag. In such cases, we can go for the attribute selector or CSS selector. So this is the selector, and the other one is template. Template, we just wrote one line of statement, home component. Because it is a one line, we have written the HTML within the same component class. If we have to write multiple lines of code here, I'll write one more h2 tag here. See, it started showing the error because it can't take up the multiple lines of the HTML. For that, what we do is, instead of using single quotes, we use the backticks. You know what backtick is? Before number one key, we have a tilde mark, right? Shift, if we press that key with the shift, then it gives tilde. Otherwise, we just normally press, it comes a backtick. If we use that backtick, it takes multiple lines of HTML template. See, I just added h2 tag with welcome. It came up now. But the recommendation is that combining his presentation logic and the controlling logic into single code, it's not a good practice to do that. For that, or if we use complete HTML page, which is huge, we can go for the external HTML template. In such case, we don't use template, but if we use template URL is the other property that we can pass on in the decorator. For that, we need to give, it takes this string, and here we can create within the home folder. I'll create new folder for the template, external template, home.component.html, because it's a HTML template I created, and within that I'll create some paragraph. I'll write inside external template. So I have created a template file. Now we need to configure that here. Home.component.html. I might miss something. Okay, done. See, the other ones, the welcome tag, those were, I just commented them out. That's why they got disappeared. And I just mapped the template URL as external template, that file that just I created now. So it is showing up here. This is how we use the external template. And we can also use internal CS. There is a styles tag within the styles property within the component decorator. It takes array of styles. We can give internal styles. If I want to give a style for h1 tag, I can just mention it. It automatically takes it. Or we can use the same external file for the CSS. Now this is the way of creating all the templates manually, but Angular CLI is providing us a way that we can use commands for creating a component. So I have created a home folder and a home component.ts, component.html, all these files manually, but I want to create a component using Angular CLI. For that, ng, the terminal I'm using on the VS Code, both are same. We can open a new terminal because it is currently running instead. I don't want to close it. I'm using this terminal. ng generate component. I want to create an about component. So this is the way how we can use ng generate component or the comments and the name of the component that I want to create. If I run that, it created a component for me. If you see the log, it created a about that component.css, about that component.html, spec.ts, and about that component ts. These 4 files it's created and updated the app module.ts. That's what we did a mistake earlier, right? We created a home component, but we did not register within the app module. But if you use the Angular CLI, it creates the folder as well as it also registers that within the app module. If you see the about is added to the folder, and if you see CSS, HTML.ts, and spec.ts is the file which contains the unit test cases. All these are added. If you go to the app modules.ts, if you see about component is there already imported as well as it is added to the declarations part. So all that we need to do is in the about component, go to about component and see the selector. Selector is the app about, and we can just start using it within the app component.html. Within the app component.html where I have added this app home. I'll also use this there. I just added the tag, and if you see the web page, see about works. This is the default template HTML that has created. Let's go to the next PPT. Those are the topics, very basics I want to just cover, and let us see what are the things that we have covered. I did not show the CSS template, but I think we have eaten a lot of time, and these are the things that we have covered: how to create a component, and how to use the element selector, attribute selector, CSS style of selector, and how we can use them within the HTML template of another component. And we also covered how to use the template, inline single line template, inline multiple line templates, and external templates. The same as the template, we can implement them for CSS styles. And we also covered how to create a new component using the Angular CLI. This is about the component. Apart from that, if you see the component that got created by the Angular CLI, it is having additional method called ng on init. So, and each component is having a life cycle. So Angular is creating components, updating components, or destroying the components while user is interacting with the application. Depending on the need, it creates new components and destroys the components if user exit from the page, something like that. So for doing so, it has been maintaining a lot of each component has a life cycle. It has to gone through all the life cycles phases. But if we have to do some our own logic into the life cycle phases, it is providing interfaces. For example, if you say on the right side, ng on changes, ng on init, ng do check, all these are the different phases of the component life cycle. If I want to do I want to show some alert when the ng init is ready. If you take the ng on init, it is similar like document.ready in JavaScript. So when the template is ready with all the presentation, so the component loading is done, then we'll get an alert. We'll get a control to do something. Similarly, ng on it, when the component HTML template is ready, then we'll get the control back to the component class to do something. In such cases, for all of these component lifecycle phases will have interfaces in Angular core. If I want to just use I need the control of ng on init, I need to import the on init interface from the core, and I just need to implement it to my component class implements that on init, and there is a method ng on init. That's it. Within that method, I can write my piece of logic. In this example, I just printed this is an on ng init log statement, but we can do whatever we want to. So this is how we can get the control of life cycle phases of each of the component. And data binding. Data binding is the concept. We have been talking about the components. Component has a TypeScript class as a backend, and the front end HTML template that can be shown on the browser. But how the communication between these two is going on, how the data flows in between the component class and the HTML template. So the concept of data binding is for that. If I want to, I have a property in the component class, I want to show that property value onto the HTML template. So this is called data binding. Sorry, there are different ways of doing that. We can just classify into three types. One is property binding, other one is event binding, and two-way binding. Property binding is the one-way binding that flows data from component to HTML templates. For example, we can see the examples, small examples, and how we do that. Property binding can be done in two ways, using string interpolation and attribute binding. String interpolation, if you see the property is there in a double curly braces. That is a notation that we need to use for property string interpolation. So for example, in a component, you have a property called, in TypeScript class, you have a property called name. Name has some value. In the HTML, if you write the double curly braces in between name, it automatically takes the value and shows up within the HTML component. So similarly, attribute binding is apart from the value, the string interpolation, whatever object you provide, it automatically converts into the string and then show it on the HTML. Like we use out.println in JSP, right? Whatever object you give it, it converts into string and uses something like that. And attribute binding is the different way. For attribute binding, we use square brackets within the attribute. For example, for the div tag, we have inner HTML attribute, or for button, we have a disabled attribute. For those attributes, if we want to bind the value from the component, for example, there is a property in my class. Do I need to show the button, enable or disable the button? If it is false, on the template side, I want to disable the button. So I'm not binding the value to button element there, but within the button we have a disabled attribute. I'm binding the value to the attribute. So that is attribute binding. We can do using the square braces, or we can use the bind hyphen and the attribute name. That is a different way we can do that.
Janardhan, just a quick time check. So it's already past 4 o'clock. Okay. So if it takes few more minutes, we can continue, or else we can.
It takes another 5 to 10 minutes. Is it okay?
Right.
Okay. Thanks. And then there is a small example I have added, but I'm skipping it. All of the three we can see at once because we are running late already. And the second one is event binding. As I said, the property binding is one way from component to template. But if user has done something on the HTML template, he's interacted with some element, dropped down, he changed or he entered some text into the text box. How do we get those kind of information from template to back to the component? For that, we use event binding. In event binding, this is the syntax that we use. The parenthesis between we use the event name within the parenthesis. Here event can be, for if you take a button as an example, on click is the HTML event, JavaScript event that we just take out the on, the click is the event name in Angular. If you take on mouse over in HTML, just take the on, mouse over will be the event in Angular. So that event name and the method, within the component we can create some method. That method name we can give with parenthesis. And if we also want to pass on the event name from the template to component, we can do the $event is the predefined word. We can use that as is, so that the entire event object will be passed on to the component. We can get all the information related to that event. I also added some small example for the event binding. And the last one is the two-way binding. For the two-way binding is, let us say, I have a property and the component. Initially, when the page loads up, I need to display the value on the component, and user did some changes. I should be listening to that so that I can take the updated value from the template. It's a two-way, component to template as well as from template to component. In such cases, if we have to do one attribute binding and one event binding. Attribute binding is for getting the initial value from component to template. Event binding is for listening to the changes that user is doing on the template. We can achieve that using, say, both the bindings on one element, or we can achieve the same thing using ng module directive. It's a directive providing by the Angular. We can check what is the directive and what is for all these things. But for now, using that ng module directive, we can implement it very easily. Ng module with the square brackets, and within that we'll have parentheses and the property name. It automatically take care of two-way binding. Actually, it uses observable patterns within it. It listens to the component property. At the same time, it listens to the template element. Whenever there is something changed in the component, it automatically updates the element. Whenever there is something happening on the element, it automatically updates the component property value. That is the two-way binding. Before going to that, I just want to show a small example on these bindings, data binding. So we just have this, and within the go to home template.ts, I just create a variable called name. As I said, the type is, this is how we mention the type, equal to Naresh. So I just created a variable Naresh. I can't create a Naresh, but okay, I just created a property with the value Naresh in my component class. In my HTML template, I want to print that inside the external template. That is what is showing, right? Inside the external template, it is showing. So in that template, what I do is I just get rid of this text and I'll add string interpolation, double curly braces in between. I just add name. If I save it, come back, see it got updated as Naresh. So this is string interpolation. If I need to, I'll create one more property here within this. I'll use for the button, I use disable. I'll just assign the value as true. This is a Boolean variable because I did not mention any type. It automatically takes as Boolean. I created as disable. On the front end side, I'll create a button. I want to do attribute binding here. Button click me is the title of that button, and disabled is the attribute. I want to, so if I save this, it automatically shows a button that is disabled. But I want to control this disabled property of this button based on the value of my components property. So currently I have created a disable property there in my component class, but I haven't mapped it to this disabled attribute. I'll just keep it like this within the square brackets, and within the double quotes, I'll mention disable. This is how we do the attribute binding. Still it is showing as disabled because the component, the property value is true, disable true. If I make this false and if I save it, see button got enabled and I'm able to click on it. So this is how we do attribute binding within the property bind. And the second way, the okay.
It's 1 or 2 seconds.
So the other way from the event binding, I'll show you the event binding, and the two-way binding we can check some other time whenever we get some time. And the event binding, I'll just write a method show alert. This is the method that I want to be called on some event from the show alert. I'll just write an alert. I wrote show alert as a method. On the template side, we have a button already, right? Here, I listen to the, I'll just add a event binding for click event. I'll write the method like this. So this is the syntax. And if we go to the page and click on the button, you see the alert. So it simply, we got nothing from the front end, but if we want to pass all the data of the event, we can use the $event as a parameter on the front end side. On the component side, we can take the event as a parameter, and I'll just print that event console.log event. So when I click on this, it showed an alert, and if I click on it on the right side, you can see the event object. It got printed, and we get all the information related to that particular event from the template to component. If you see the type, it is a click. So like that, we can get all those things, and we can check the two-way binding is binding both of the things from backend. I mean, two-way from component to template and template to component. We can achieve very easily using the direct to ng module. We can check that later. I think that's it because we are already late. Thanks for all the patience. And you got any questions?